call the July 11th meeting of the Traffic Review Advisory Board meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome. The Traffic Review Board reviews items of interest regarding parking and traffic items. We are an advisory board, and our favorable recommendations today will go before the Oshkosh Common Council. The council can accept or reject any recommendation from this board. If you don't agree with our decision, you can discuss the item with any council member. If the board does not recommend an item, a common council member may sponsor a new ordinance regarding this item or that item. All items require 2 readings before the common council. The first reading will take place on Tuesday, July 25th at 6 p.m., and you will be allowed to comment on the item at that time, though the council will take no action. On Tuesday, August 8th at 6 p.m., the item will be on a second reading, at which time the council will take action. You will again be allowed to speak at that time. For this afternoon's meeting, I will read each agenda item, at which time, if you'd like to speak, please take a seat at the end of the table and give your name and address. I do ask that you keep your comments pertinent to the agenda item. The item will then come back to this board for discussion and action. With Marlene gone, I guess that leaves it up to you, Jim. Please call the roll.
Haas.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Zinsky.
Here.
Kraus.
Here.
Becker.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
First item on this afternoon's agenda is approval of prior minutes. Does anyone have any comments, questions, additions, or deletions?
Move it.
Second. Any further comment? Last call. Please call the roll.
Haas,
Aye.
Ross,
Aye.
Szynski,
Aye.
Krause,
Aye.
Becker,
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Carried.
Which brings us to public comment. The board has adopted a public participation policy which provides 15 minutes for the general public to comment on a first-come, first-served basis. Citizens must provide their name and address and may speak on matters related to traffic issues within the authority of this board. Statements should be addressed to the board members and not to staff or other persons. Items that are on the agenda should be addressed at the time the item is read and not during the period for public comments. Statements are limited to 3 minutes, and citizens may only provide comment one time unless special permission is granted by the board. Is there anyone that would like to avail themselves of the opportunity? Seeing none, moving to new business. First item being a request for 2-hour parking on New York Ave, south side, from the eastern right-of-way line of Cedar Street to 130 feet east of Cedar Street between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Current condition, 1-hour parking between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Okay, this is a request from the owner of this, I guess it's called Tangle Salon now. She said, they have patrons that park for more than 1 hour, and they've been getting parking tickets recently. So she thought that 2 hours would be sufficient. I did discuss with her, obviously, the reason that's there is to keep for vehicle turnover, because that's in the university area. And she was okay with that. She just wanted to be able to have her patrons get in and out without any fear of getting a ticket. So she's requesting 2 hours.
Anyone have any comment?
About 150 feet of frontage that she's asking for?
Yeah, it's basically, right now, there's a lot of parking in that area, but it's within, there's 130, it's approximately, so Cedar Street to 130 feet. Yeah, it's about 130 feet right now.
Is that typically just client parking, or does that other people fill it up too? Because they'd be primo spots then if they'd be 2 hours compared to 1, so they might be first time.
Right.
Everybody else too.
Right, yep. Yeah, we can't designate them, and
Yeah, definitely.
we get those requests once in a while.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's in the public right away, I can't designate it for.
By a parking lot, yeah.
So, yeah, whoever gets there, gets there.
In the past, those businesses had a quicker turnover, like a donut shop, and, people aren't gonna be in there for an
Sure.
hour.
Yeah, we do need a second to,
Second.
anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, call the roll.
Haas,
Aye.
Ross,
Aye.
Szynski,
Aye.
Rousey,
Aye.
Becker,
Aye.
Christensen,
Aye.
carried 6-0.
Which brings us to item number 2. A request for a stop sign on Evans at Nevada Avenue. Current condition, Evans yields at Nevada.
Okay, this is a citizen request, and I'm sure she'll be speaking on it in a minute as she's here. So you might recall, we went over this the last time we had a request, but I'll just refresh your memory. Some of the things that the manual for uniform traffic control devices states for the consideration of yield versus stop signs. At intersections where a full stop is not necessary at all times, consideration should first be given to using less restrictive measures such as a yield sign. The use of stop signs on the minor street approaches should be considered if a stop is always required based on one of the following warrants. Those warrants would be based on vehicle volume on the through street exceeds 6,000 vehicles per day. The last traffic count was about 900 vehicles a day on Nevada. A restricted view exists that requires road users to stop in order to adequately observe conflicting traffic on the through street. That's not really an issue in this intersection. And then the third criteria is crash records. And they state that crash records indicate there are 3 or more crashes that are susceptible to correction by the installation of a stop sign have been reported within a 12-month period, or 5 or more within a 2-year period. And such crashes include right-angle collisions involving road users on the minor street, approach failing to yield to the through street. So the crash history here, I didn't find any in 2016. There were 2 in 2015, 1 in 2014, 1 in 2012. So based on those warrants, the yield sign is a correct device there. However, I did further research the crashes that occurred in the last couple of years, and they are related to the failure to yield. So it looks like, if that was a stop sign, the crashes in 2015 and the one in 14 were all related to vehicles failing to obey that yield sign. So there is a potential correctable measure there.
There's not been any this year?
No, I don't have the records from this year yet, so I didn't get a chance to check that.
Are you
What's the
here?
traffic
Oh.
on Evans?
It's pretty minor too. I think it was about, if I remember right, it was like 600. I mean, a residential street like that, you're never gonna get to the warrants.
Is that pretty comparable to the same size streets, traffic flow with yield signs in the city too? Those traffic?
I mean, that
crashes?
counts.
Crash amounts?
Oh, the crash
Typical?
amounts? Yeah, I mean, that's not atypical,
So,
kind of ordinary, I guess. Although generally, if you have one a year, something like that, a yield sign, would probably be about normal. I mean, a lot of them you don't have any, so, obviously that's the goal.
You have a bit of information you'd like to add to the discussion?
Yes, I will.
Yeah, state your name and address if you would.
My name is Lori Seeger, Lori Sieger. I live at 1516 Evans. I live one house off of the corner. Through the years, and I know you've only went back a few years, and I don't know the exact dates, there have been some pretty bad accidents. We've had an SUV flipped on itself. We have had a car end up on its roof, and the woman in there had to be extracted. She couldn't get out. We've had where a truck with the accident took down the pole and the yield sign and just missed fire hydrant. We've had a vehicle that when it was hit, it spun and came within 5 feet of hitting the corner house. Myself and my family are outside all the time. And it is amazing. You don't have the near misses marked down. The near misses of accidents with vehicles, the near misses with the accident with a vehicle possibly hitting a person walking or on a bicycle. We live 3 blocks from Emmeline Cook School. When school is released, I'm not outside. I can't, because when we're outside and we hear the horns beeping, we hear swearing out the window, we hear cars screeching. I don't want to see a kid get hit. But it isn't only about the kids, it's about the adults too. Since we moved in there in '94, when we come down Nevada to turn on to Evans, we yield on Nevada. Because if we haven't, my husband, myself, my 2 kids, there's many times we would have been T-boned if we hadn't yielded when we did, that we shouldn't have had to have yielded. It's amazing, and we have called the police department many times, and we understand they can't be there 24/7. Hey, come on out, we're a racetrack today. Nail them, they're going through, they are not yielding. The red lights aren't coming on the backs of their vehicles. Or if they are, they're right up to that intersection, they barely tap it, and away they go. If you're traveling northbound on Evans and you come up to that intersection, there's like a dip. It's amazing how many cars bottom out there. About a week ago, there was a little white car that was loaded with people, and it was speeding at least 50 miles an hour, and you could hear it coming. You heard it hit, and there it went. By the time we got from the garage out to the sidewalk to see where this was, you couldn't see it anymore. It was past Murdoch. I really hope you guys consider that, especially with having the school there and the kids that go and come home from school on their bicycles and are walking, and every other person. Please put a stop sign there and put some flags on it so they're seeing it. I don't know if they're just not seeing it. I don't know. Thank you. Questions? No. And I welcome any of you to come sit in my driveway and watch this at any time.
I have a question, have the police ever tried setting out like those things that say you're driving, the electronic things, like you're going so fast?
I can't speak specifically to that area, but if there was a request for it in the past, and I do recall that there have been many calls to this area, that is an option to do that.
Sounds like a speeding problem,
Mhm.
My wife and I do a lot of bicycling, and one of our streets that we go down quite often is Nevada, because our daughter lives on Hazel Street. And I would agree that the yield sign doesn't really mean much. I don't think, and when you're on your bike, you're especially vulnerable, and coming to an uncontrolled intersection, of course, you're gonna slow down and really watch. And even the yield signs don't, I think it's kind of like a yellow light. It's like, okay, we'll just get through it. And so, but that's my thought. If it's something that's going to make make that area safer, and you are very close to the school, I would be in favor of it.
Anyone else with questions, comments? All right, call the roll.
Haas,
Aye.
Ross,
No.
Szynski,
Aye.
Krause,
Aye.
Becker,
Aye.
Christensen,
Aye.
carried, 5-1.
Which brings us to item number 3, a request for feedback on possible lane reconfiguration at the intersection of 9th Ave and Oregon Street and South Park Ave in Oregon Street.
All right, we have James Robbie here, who's our Public Works Director. So I'll let him kind of go through what this is. But basically, Oregon Street's being reconstructed in the area next year. So there's a lot of utilities in the area, so there's a need to do some planning ahead of time. And right now, the Public Works Department's working on the plans, and he can kind of go over what their thoughts and recommendations are and answer any questions.
Yeah, as Jim mentioned, Oregon Street from 8th Avenue to 16th Avenue is planned for reconstruction in 2018. Obviously, the CIP has not been approved yet, but this is one of the streets that is very important, and we anticipate continuing to stay in the CIP. Part of it is driven by a need to get sanitary sewer service extended towards the south side of the city. Sanitary sewer will be starting at 8th Avenue and ultimately extending all the way to Ripple Avenue and beyond in many years to come. But as we start looking at options for reconstructing Oregon Street, as Jim mentioned, there are a lot of other utilities that are within the street, AT&T being a primary one. Jackson, Oregon corridor is the primary trunk line from Fond du Lac to Appleton for AT&T. As such, they have a very significant duct package underneath that street, and we need to try to get them as much information as we can and as soon as we can for them to be able to work on their plans for potential reconstruction in conjunction with our project. As a point of reference, if this were a DOT-led project, DOT would probably be giving plans to the private utilities about 2 to 3 years in advance for them to start working on their plans for relocation. Typical city reconstruct project, we're usually getting the private utilities things in about December for March, April start of construction. So we looked at this one and recognized that we need to get the private utilities and AT&T in particular information as soon as we can, so that they've got a little bit more time to be able to work on this. One of the things that came out of last year's CIP process is we engaged the neighborhood on Bayshore to discuss street width. We recognized that starting it at the end of October when we had our neighborhood CIP meeting really caused us some challenges in getting the design completed in a timely manner. So we needed to get Oregon Street moving sooner to avoid some of those challenges. So as we started looking at it, Oregon Street currently is a 44-foot wide street face-to-face. It is in a 60-foot right-of-way. As you can see on the screen, it's basically paved from building front to building front, especially in this area from 16th Avenue to the north. The building faces are right at the edge of right-of-way, so it is very tight to be able to work within this area. Looking at the 44-foot width, it's for the number of lanes that are present. There's presently a parking lane on each side of the street and one travel lane in each side, in each direction. So 44 feet is excessively wide for that amount of configuration, the 2 parking lanes and the 2 driving lanes. So what we have been looking at is narrowing the street to 40 feet from face to face, and then the extra width, 2 feet on each side, would become paved terrace just as it is now. So it would still be paved all the way from building to building. You just have a little extra sidewalk space and a little bit less street configuration. In our initial review of this, the 2 intersections in particular, 9th Avenue and South Park Avenue, southbound there are 3 dedicated lanes: right turn only, straight only, and left turn only. Given that lane configuration, you have a very narrow northbound lane for vehicles turning off on 9th Avenue and South Park Avenue to be able to get into. So that is very tight on that side of the road, especially with where parking starts on the east side of the street there. Another concern is with the parking on the west side of the street, if there's a car parked in the very last stall that is available and there's 1 or 2 vehicles in the straight lane, you cannot get into the right turn lane anyhow because you're blocked off by the cars in the parking lane. So as we looked at those constraints, we thought, well, what if we combine the right and straight into a single lane and then continue with the dedicated left turn only lane? So what that does is currently the 3 lanes are each 10 foot in width, leaving about a 14-foot wide lane on the opposite side to turn into. If we combine the right and straight into a single lane at approximately 14 feet in width, Keeping the left turn lane the 10 feet that it currently is, that leaves you a 16-foot travel lane to turn into on the northbound side, and the street is 4 feet narrower. So it opens up the turning movements in. It gives you a little more room on the right and straight lane. 10 foot is tight for a right turn in these areas. So, anything larger than a car is probably straddling that lane line and taking both lanes anyhow. So it kind of combines the lane configuration into how it's currently being utilized and stripes it out in that manner.
I guess the question I have, do we have any traffic counts on what actual movements are being made at that intersection? Because if you combine a right turn only, or right in a straight, you're gonna back up that lane potentially, depending on who's in the front.
And depending on where they are parked on the parking lane right now, because if somebody's parked in an end stall, you're not getting into that right turn lane now anyhow. So,
Right, but again, I don't know that we want to increase the anxiety or the stress level if there's somebody in the first position going straight and there's 4 cars behind them that want to go right.
Yeah, well, to answer your question, we have the through counts, but we don't have turning count movements, because we only have 2 methods to get turning movements right now. One is to manually sit out there and count them, and the second is to use cameras, which we could potentially do. We have cameras, but then we have to pay somebody to analyze the turning movements. That's something we could potentially look at.
So if you narrow it here, if your semi is turning right here, is that going to be an issue with any, if you've taken some,
Taking a pull down.
yeah. 'Cause I know that's a tight turn already with
Southbound onto westbound. I would anticipate that semi making that turn currently already utilizes all 3 lanes and would continue to utilize both the straight right and the left turn lane in order to make that right turn lane. Because to make that right turn right now, you're not making it out of the right turn lane. You're using all
right.
3 lanes, and you would continue to utilize the whole street or at least the whole southbound side of the street to make that right turn lane movement. Because in general, it'd be going from all 3 lanes of 30 feet to 2 lanes of 24 feet. So it gets a little bit narrower, but I think you'd not see them crossing the center line into oncoming. You'd just see them utilizing the whole southbound side of the street.
Are we gonna then move the stop bar back on 9th potentially too, just to, because it's still gonna be tight, would be my guess. That left front on that semi-tractor trailer is gonna be, pardon my French, damn close.
That'd be something, I think, Jim, I think your staff repaint those lines after we get done with construction typically anyhow.
Yep, and we just follow the MUTCD standards. I don't remember exactly what it is there, but that's something we could potentially do too. We'd have to look at it and see where it needs to be.
Yeah, I believe eastbound 9th there has got a straight right and a dedicated left, so you certainly could move that dedicated left back a little bit more.
Yeah, we start with the guidelines, but then we'll take a look at it too, and we can move it if we need to.
Right, yeah. There's not a lot of wiggle room right there.
No, both of these intersections are tight. At 9th Avenue, it's the west side that is got the buildings right to the front corner, to the right-of-way lines. At South Park, the south side has buildings tight. The church is set back a little bit, but their monument sign is very close, and I believe there's a parking lot on the northeast quadrant of South Park in Oregon.
To me, the traffic, should increase considerably with the Morgan District and the arena, not too far away as well. I was thinking if you consider removing parking like on the west side.
At this point, we've not been considering parking. Bike and pedestrian committee will also be discussing this topic. Obviously adding an extra 2 feet to the sidewalks on each side through this area will certainly make it much more pedestrian friendly on the sidewalks. The only way that I see to be able to get a bicycle lane would be to remove parking from one side, similar to what was done on North Main Street from Murdoch to New York last year.
I think with that area, there's all businesses on that street too. I don't know if we want to really remove parking on there because
You still have it on the east side, and a lot of the places have off-street parking too.
No, very, very few actually in this area have off-street parking.
Between 6th and 9th, I think, anyway.
No, the Hobbytown shares an off-street parking. The east side between 8th and 9th, the only off-street, I believe, is the city-owned lot on 8th Avenue. That was one of the things we were looking at. There's actually very limited off-street parking, unfortunately, in this area.
Sixth and Oregon, they got that office building has parking in behind too.
6th and Oregon, yes.
So I'm mainly looking at between Sixth and Ninth on the west side. I would continue the east side parking. I'm just looking at removing the
Well, the
west
air-
side parking.
Go back up.
I
there.
drive down that, area, pretty much on a daily basis. And, like if you're going south, coming off the bridge, you're going into one lane, you got 2 lanes all the way on Jackson, and then once you get to Oregon, it's like 1 lane. Whereas like if you're going north, you got 1 lane that goes into 2, so that's obviously not a problem. Because like you said, you're coming right away, you got the office building, which has a big lot in behind, and Hobbytown's got, then you also have the side streets in between, so there's not a lot of businesses that would be.
Well, I think Dan brings up a good point. I mean, you've got side streets you can use for parking purposes. So, I mean, my preference would be, if it makes sense, you may want to restrict parking, within X number of feet from that intersection, just to allow for that extra space. And as far as, and I know it wasn't brought up officially as a topic of conversation, but as far as bike lanes go, not a good idea, my humble opinion, on Oregon Street. That's a can of worms. In fact, I'm not even sure we can do it, Jim, given that's technically alternate 41, right?
Probably could, but I don't know, is it in the
I don't
bike
know
and
that we'd
pedestrian
want
plan?
to.
It's not.
We had to shut it down.
It's not currently in the bike and pedestrian circulation plan that I'm aware of.
That's a recipe for disaster.
And that's what, we felt widening the sidewalks, opened up the pedestrian movements. As you mentioned, there's, development going on in the area, which, we think will increase the pedestrian traffic in this area, which is why we felt, wider sidewalks, paved terrace areas would be much more beneficial than maintaining the 44-foot street width that there currently is right now. As I mentioned, the only way to do bike lanes is to lose parking on one side, and that was not a direction that Public Works staff had currently been evaluating, but I just wanted to mention that it will be discussed at bicycle and pedestrian for them to provide their input to the Common Council as well.
Speaking just as, we gotta remove a few parking spots, near the corners, to make it a little more accessible. Wouldn't really have a problem with that necessarily, but open that up to bike traffic and provide them a dedicated lane. It's just a disaster waiting to happen, potentially.
My guess is my guess is they would probably support the wider sidewalk. I don't, this currently isn't, like James said, it isn't currently on the bike and pedestrian plan, so just from my personal experience, I don't see that they're getting, I doubt there'd be a lot of support for bike lanes on Oregon, just based on some of the other discussions we've had, but.
Well, but certainly the reconstruction of the street does open the possibility.
Right, yeah, sure.
Being upfront.
Yep, yeah, you're right, it's a possibility.
Back to you.
No, I think, I didn't really have a whole lot else, we're kind of early in the stages, but as we identified last year, we felt it was important to get started by having some of these kind of discussions at the committee level much sooner than we have in previous years, and especially with a street like Oregon Street and the importance that it plays in our traffic movement, both vehicular and pedestrian in the city. As I said, for that reason, we really felt that going to a 40-foot street width made sense from a public works standpoint.
So if it goes to the 40 feet width, will it taper down at 16th then, or I should say widen out at 16th, or is the plan to put it all the way?
We haven't started evaluating what's going to happen in the next stretch, which would be 16th to 21st, but it would certainly make sense. 16th to 20th would be kind of the next route, and then south of 20th right now is 4 vehicle lanes in 2 vehicle lanes in each direction right now. I don't envision that changing, but we would certainly evaluate the stretch from 16th to 20th as we start looking at next year's plans as well. but we haven't started that analysis yet.
All right.
Anyone else with any comments or questions for Mr. Ravi? Did you get the feedback you were looking for?
You looking for a vote on it, or?
Well, I think, what we're looking to do is to try and get a recommendation from the committee to include with council, so either, within the next month or so, we'd like to, have council be able to give staff some direction to keep moving forward, so we don't get into a situation where our design might impact, everybody else getting their work done as well.
I think sounds like we're looking for a recommendation, so that would be a vote on whether you support the proposal.
Okay, with that understanding, does anyone have any, again, questions? Thought we were just providing.
That's to
general-
recommend the 40 option?
Yes.
That is what I'm asking for. We have the 44 option shown. Again, we would be looking at 40 feet and then just widening it out to 44 at those two intersections in particular, and kind of maintaining that same lane configuration, but tapering back down to a 40-foot wide street away from those intersections is another option that we were analyzing. And of course, kind of the third option would be 44 all the way, but that's kind of a last option in the eyes of our staff.
It's currently 44 all the way.
It's currently 44 all the way, yes.
Yeah, like I said, I just feel that the traffic volume could, increase significantly with the Morgan District and the Sawdust District both being in that area. And I think it'd be premature to narrow the street at this time.
So that's a no, Dan? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, I wouldn't be in favor of narrowing it at all. Like I say, I drive in this area quite a bit. I live on 9th.
How wide is the road on Main Street?
Main Street from Irving to the river is 38 feet.
And that's a heavier traffic flow.
I would say there's probably heavier traffic on this stretch of Oregon than there is on that stretch of Main Street.
Which has to lead you to believe why?
I'm sorry?
I said why.
I see, at least
I
from
know
a
why.
truck traffic standpoint, I see more truck traffic on Oregon than I do on that stretch of Main Street.
You took
I
the width? That's where I was going.
I don't know that the width has done a significant change. It is still US Highway 45 all the way up to Oregon High, the one-way pair. Maybe north of there, maybe some trucks are getting off of it. I don't know that we've looked that in depth at it, and I don't remember the overall counts, but I thought Oregon had a higher count than that stretch of Main Street from a total traffic standpoint.
Yeah, it was a little bit higher.
Surprising.
I think a lot of people on Main Street, they service the businesses from side, behind the streets too.
But there'd be a lot more on-street parking on Main Street probably than Oregon.
Yeah, I believe there is more on-street parking that's available on
More
that
congested
stretch of Main
for
Street.
use.
Right.
We got Dan's opinion. Anyone else wish to throw in their 2 cents?
I would support the wider sidewalks, 'cause I mean, every city that's renovating and making their downtowns more user-friendly have wider sidewalks. I mean, it takes away from the street, but it's still wider than Main Street would be.
It's 2 feet wider than that stretch of Main Street. I know there are a few businesses that put out like the sandwich board type signs right now. It's tight right now with those on the sidewalk. Certainly the extra 2 feet does provide a significantly more amount of space for pedestrians and bicycles if they're using the sidewalk to maneuver in those areas if there's any of the other things set up.
How wide are the Main Street sidewalks?
They're 10 feet downtown, if that's what you're asking. And like the downtown area, they widened them to 10 feet when it was reconstructed. I believe that was before my time, but that's
Yeah, it
what
was
I understand.
2010. I don't remember the exact dimensions. If I remember right, though, the Main Street right-of-way is the same as the Oregon, so, it's Yeah, it'd be about 10 to 10.5 feet on Main Street. And if we would go to the 40-foot option here, it would be about 9 feet on Oregon.
I'm pretty sure it's 10 feet because I've heard that referenced at other meetings.
I gotta say, I'm a little bit torn. I do have some concerns about narrowing the street and providing a little extra sidewalk, just because, to the point I was trying to make, I think people avoid Main Street for that very reason. If they can't, I personally, I mean, I live near Menominee Park, and I won't go down Main Street if I don't have to from Irving, just because it is as tight as it is, and all it takes is some, pardon my French again, but some idiot not to get close enough to the curb, and it becomes worse, going down the stretch between, say, Parkway and High, as an example. You know, anywhere before you get to the bridge at the river. So, not a big fan of narrowing the street to accommodate a little extra sidewalk at that point. Because the road, after all, is for the street. The sidewalk is for pedestrians. And, you know, I've got enough space at this point. I do appreciate your comment about giving a little extra space for sandwich boards, but by the same token, the airspace above the sidewalk is available for that as well. So, I'm gonna say, else?
I'm not in favor of narrowing the street either.
Well, you got 3 no's, so it's up to the remaining 3 people sitting at the table.
I think the, leaving it at the 4440, I think is going to facilitate the traffic movement, because I think, you know, somebody had mentioned that if, you know, things kind of get piled up sometimes, if the person that's first in line and what would be to turn right is going straight, and then you get, you know, you get a backup like that, I just, I would support the 4440 option.
So, do we need a formal vote?
I think that'd
Sounds
probably
like-
be helpful.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for us to, you know, present it to council in that manner.
Okay.
I move that we vote on the 4440 option.
Anyone care to second?
I'll second that.
Last call for comments, questions, or concerns. Call the roll.
Oz.
Aye.
Ross.
Aye.
Sisnowski.
Aye.
Rousey.
No.
Becker.
Aye.
Christensen.
I
Carried 5-1.
Which brings us to
Thank you very much.
staff statements.
Thank you.
The only thing I have for staff statements, and I just got this today, so I didn't have time to get it on the agenda, was, as somebody, if you follow the council, you may know, is that one of the city manager's goals that he was given by council was to look at boards and commissions. And they did a presentation at the last council meeting with some of those findings. If you're interested, it's out on the city website, and it's also the last council meeting, they had a discussion on it. But basically, I'll try to give you a real brief description. Part of that was to look at the number of boards and committees that we have. You know, do we have too many? Do we have too few? So there's some boards and commissions that are required that are statutorily required. So those obviously need to stay as they are, but then we do have a number of advisory boards, such as this, and sustainability, bike and pedestrian, you know, there's a lot of examples. So the studies, what it found out is that we're not abnormal. a lot of cities didn't even realize how many boards and commissions they've had when Mark had asked them. But then there's a number of different options to look at. Some of the options are to possibly, can some of the boards and commissions be consolidated? Do some of them have a similar mission? Do councils need to be, do you need to have a council member as a voting member of the boards and commissions, or should they be there more as observers? And there's, what are the size of the boards and commissions, the frequency of meetings, so all that type of stuff is on the table. So anyway, that's something they're looking at. They discussed it with the boards and chairs meeting this morning. But what I'm getting at is, so that's the discussion that's going on. One that you guys might be interested in that's been discussed as a possibility is merging the Park and Utility Commission with the Traffic Review Advisory Board. That's one thing that's out there. But how it affects you guys is the city manager is going to be sending out a survey, probably within the next week, where there'll be some questions where he'll be looking for your input. So it's going to go to the staff liaisons, like such as myself. It'll go to the council members, and then it'll go to the boards and commissions members. So he'll be looking for some feedback on those types of things. And he came up with a list of recommendations. So there'll be questions on there, whether you support those specific recommendations, and then if you support things like the frequency of meetings being less, and then there's a area on there for comments or any other ideas you might have as well. So that's kind of the context of what we'll be looking for.
What about adding in the transit and with parking on us?
That is an option as well that I believe is on there.
Yeah, a lot of it seems to be it's duplication. I don't know why you're the charge. I mean, so you know more than anybody,
Yeah, I mean, personally, transit, we have we're federally funded, so we have some things that we need the Transit Advisory Board for, that we need them to act on. Doesn't say that it couldn't be combined. It could. Personally, I think they're separate tracks, but I mean, that's for debate. Whereas like the parking and the traffic review, the park and utility really, when we had paid parking and meters, it made a lot of sense. We don't have that anymore. So that's one of the things they looked at, is frequency of meetings and agenda items, and whether there was cancellation of meetings due to lack of agenda items or quorums. The park and utility, we haven't been meeting as frequently just because there hasn't been a lot of issues. A lot of people don't know that the off-street parking goes to the park and utility, and on-street comes to traffic review. So there's a lot of similarities there. But those are options to look at, like you had mentioned, consolidating you can consolidate based on function, you could consolidate based on staff liaison, which, in my case would be most of the transportation stuff. Or you could look at having less frequent meetings. You could look at, I think some of the things on there are maybe sustainability and bike and ped can maybe be combined, or they can maybe be a part of the plan commission. So there's a number of those options out there for your consideration. And he's just finalizing the survey now. I know they had some feedback this morning at the board and chairs meeting that he was going to try to incorporate in there. So that is for that in your mail in the next week or two.
Anyone with a request for a future agenda item? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, you.